Good evening, everyone. My name is Isabella Tzimba. I'm a finance and capital markets lawyer and a member of the Hellenic Alumni Association of the London School of Economics and Political Sciences. I am delighted to welcome you to this evening to our webinar, ESG in the Time of COVID-19. Before I present the agenda of our discussion and introduce you to our distinguished panel speakers, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you all for joining us this evening, and given the circumstances, to thank you for welcoming us to your homes. I would also like to thank our panel speakers for so generously giving their time for this webinar. And of course, I would like to thank our sponsors for their support. You will please allow me now to acknowledge them individually. And sponsors are Inter-American and the John S. Lattis Public Benefit Foundation. Our media sponsors, the newspapers, Καθημερινή Greek edition, and the New York Times International Καθημερινή English edition. Our strategic partner, the Hellenic Association of Entrepreneurs. Our communication consultant, CSR Hellas. Our communication supporter, VNO Communication. And our supporters, the Ekali Club, Coca-Cola Hellas, the Athens Medical Group, the Hellenic Bankers Association UK, Involve Entrepreneurship, the AC Laskaridis Charitable Foundation, and 3K Investment Partners. For the next hour and a half, we will explore ESG through the lens of 3 different time periods: the pre-COVID era and the rise of ESG, the pandemic pandemonium, and the wide-ranging impacts on the ESG trends, and last but certainly not least, the post-pandemic world, including how businesses can unlock ESG opportunities in the future. We will also be discussing the challenges that companies face when they try to effectively scale and measure and implement their sustainability initiatives, and equally the difficulties that the market and more specifically investors face when they try to assess those initiatives and the overall sustainability journeys of the companies. To this end, we're joined here today by a panel of distinguished speakers, policymakers, experts, academics, and business people to hear their perspectives and insights on ESG. As it is, after all, that with cross-section collaboration that we can achieve ESG goals. As this is a live discussion, I strongly encourage you, the audience, to get involved in our conversation by sending your questions to events@lsc-alumni.gr. You can also start a conversation on Facebook in the comments section under the live video using the hashtag HAALSE. Before we kick off the discussion, I'd like to give the floor to our association's chairman, CEO of Athens Medical Group, and chairman of the Hellenic Association of Entrepreneurs, Dr. Vasilis Apostolopoulos, for the opening remarks. Mr. Apostolopoulos, the floor is now yours.
Your Excellency, Minister Tsakiris, honorable panelists, and distinguished guests. It is with great pleasure that I welcome you all today to this very timely event organized by the Hellenic Alumni Association of the LSE, with the strategic support of the Hellenic Entrepreneurs Association on the key issue of environmental, social, and corporate governance in the time of COVID. The pandemic rapidly became the #1 global crisis. All states, societies, and corporations are de facto affected and afflicted, either by the disease itself or the isolation and austere measures that they have embraced to keep it in check. The pandemic has had a game-changing impact across all layers of life. Global governance will have to be reconceptualized and revamped to respond to the realities and needs of the new era. Leadership largely fell short in the management of the global health pandemic. It exposed the limits of our global governance architecture, the limitations of our institutions, and the systemic weaknesses of our international organizations. In short, our global governance mechanisms need a decisive and multi-layered overhaul. We have learned a lot, and we need to act, adapt, and restructure. Moreover, the pandemic transformed the cliché of some problems being too big for one country to solve alone into a pressing reality. Last May, I wrote a paper in Brussels on these new dynamics, which I was highlighting the ways in which firms, governments, international organizations, societies, and even families and individuals operate will change forever. Almost a year later, I'm bittersweet as I look back on my predictions and analysis. I'm glad that as the head of the largest private healthcare group in Greece, I had foreseen accurately the dynamics and managed to steer my firm clear of danger and support decisively the Greek people and our state in the national effort against the pandemic. On the other hand, I'm skeptical due to the mismanagement of the pandemic crisis on a global and European level, with one obvious example being the current challenges associated with the availability of vaccines. And I will stop here on this. In the same paper, I also suggested that corporate leaders who acted fast in response to the pandemic, placing corporate social responsibility and their patriotic responsibility above all else, will most likely find a warmer embrace by the public in the new era, rewarded for putting health before profits and human life before balance sheets. I strongly believe that those who stood next to their societies and supported the national effort won the respect and recognition of their societies and have strengthened their footprint. I know this firsthand as I spearheaded 6 major initiatives of our group to support the national health system over the past 12 months, which included offering up a whole clinic in support of the national effort. The embrace of people has been the greatest reward, and I was glad to see that our initiatives encouraged others to emulate our example and follow our lead. In conclusion, I would add that the effects of the pandemic on ESG will surely be transformative. A short time ago, the term was almost solely associated with the protection of the environment and resource gaps and limitations. Today, the term has been expanded to include social issues such as prospects for self-development and progress in a work environment, advancement and management of skills and talent, quality and safety guarantees and standards, as well as data protection, management and security. All of these being pressing challenges for state, firms, and individuals globally. Simultaneously, ESG as a norm and pillar also refers to important matters of corporate governance, such as board diversity, inclusion, and business ethics. In many ways, ESG is emerging as a key part of the compass for the social, political, and business leaders of our time. It is strongly associated with responsible leadership and ethical management. It involves living up to one's sustainability commitment, CSR principles, and code of ethics. It furthermore involves building high value-added businesses that generously give back to their societies through positive externalities and CSR policies that have a powerful and lasting impact. It is becoming established as a key connector between corporate leadership and social needs. And the pandemic will surely act as an accelerator and catalyst for a series of debates, national and international, on the role of ESG as the norm evolves, the different tiers of leadership and responsibility, and the ways in which the best practices will be adopted to build better, more sustainable, and more balanced business ecosystem. At this point, I want to thank all the sponsors and supporters for their valuable contribution to the success of the event. I'm looking forward to the discussion and conclusions of the webinar. Isabella, if you want it more formally, Ms. Chirba, the floor is yours, and the warm congratulations for all your hard efforts.
Thank you very much, Mr. Apostolopoulos and dear Vasily, in a less formal way. I'm delighted now to get us starting after this very interesting introduction remarks made by Mr. Apostolopoulos, and welcome His Excellency, Mr. Yannis Tsakiris, Deputy Minister of Development and Investments, Ms. Maria Alexiou, Chair of CSR Hellas and member of the Board of Directors of CSR Europe, Ms. Lilia Mektariou, Franchise Country Director, Greece, Cyprus, Malta of Coca-Cola Hellas, Mr. Mark Hempstead, Head of Alternative Investments for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa of JP Morgan Wealth Management in London. Ms. Chloe Laskaridis, Senior Member of the Board of Directors of Lamsa Hellenic Hotels S.A. and Member of the Board of the A.C. Laskaridis Charitable Foundation. I note here that Mrs. Laskaridis will be actually wearing two hats this evening. Last but certainly not least, Professor Ioannis Ioannou, Associate Professor for Strategy and Entrepreneurship in London Business School. Hello all and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. So let me start first with the pre-pandemic era and the rise of ESG, and we will follow the Socratic method and ask the question. I will start by asking Professor Ioannou. ESG, CSR, sustainability, non-financial information, responsible business conduct, too many different terms, Yannis, too much jargon. What does ESG mean, please? And which term would you suggest that we use as it better reflects what ESG is supposed to mean?
Isabella, thank you very much for inviting me. First of all, it's really a pleasure and a privilege to be joining this group of esteemed speakers to talk about these very important issues. You mentioned some of the acronyms, and you're touching on a painful point for those of us that are working in this space. This is known as the alphabet soup. The idea that there are just so many different versions of these different initiatives. So I'm always the kind of person that looks at the glass half full instead of half empty. So for me, this proliferation only indicates how important these issues are, how complex they are, and the fact that we are slowly but steadily developing so many different approaches to them. So you're not going to be surprised that I'm not going to endorse any particular definition here tonight, but what I will highlight instead is the fact that, well, what is important at the corporate level is to really understand how is it that companies themselves try to integrate environmental and social issues at the core of their business, not as a Friday afternoon activity, but rather in the center of the business model. And it's equally important to understand how the entire capital markets and asset managers in particular are trying to integrate ESG considerations into their decision-making, into their investment decision-making processes. So rather than getting caught up in labels, although those could be confusing sometimes, I think I would argue it's much more important for us to always dig deeper to understand the degree of integration at corporates, as well as the degree of integration in the asset management industry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yannis, for explaining to us what ESG stands for and that it's all a matter of labeling. Now, let's get a little bit to the practical side of ESG, and I will now invite Mrs. Lilian Nectariou. Lilian, what does ESG mean to your organization, and is it hard to incorporate sustainability goals to your business corporate strategy?
Sorry. Good evening from my side. Thank you, Isabella. Glad to join you this evening. Listen, I have to say that this change is coming, and the pandemic has accelerated probably this trend. So it's true that in the last, let's say, period of time, corporations like Coca-Cola have embedded the corporate responsibility, ESG, as you want to call it, right in the heart of their business strategy. This is not an easy change, and it requires for a total transformation of how a corporation is organized and how it works. For us in the Coca-Cola company, this starts with having a purpose and ESG at the very heart of our business strategy. So you need to make this like kind of your mantra. And for us, our vision is to refresh the world and make a difference. And you can see there, even in the way that this is framed, how it gets, let's say, a pivotal part of the strategy and what we want to achieve with our operations. Now, after that, you have to really define the areas where you want to make a difference. And for us in the Coca-Cola Company, these areas have to do with three very clear priorities. Our vision around waste and our vision about a world without waste, our water stewardship, and our focus behind diversity and inclusion with emphasis to women and young people around the world. So clearly having a purpose and a vision, and then defining the areas, and then all the corporate kind of governance has to really support this vision and these areas with everything that we do. You know, in the business world, we are very practical and we are KPIing everything that we do so that we have a clear look of success for everything, and we kind of measure ourselves and our achievements. So if we want to talk about these areas, in the area of waste, we have set a global target that is to use recycled PET in our all our plastic bottles at the level of 50% around the world until 2030. And then again until 2030 to really collect and recycle each bottle or can that we put in the market or the equivalent of it. So you have the vision, you have the areas, and you have the targets, and then you can measure yourself around these targets, and then you can course correct. And this somehow guides your decisions, guides your initiatives, and also guides your investments that have to be aligned with this vision. If you want this vision to become real and not stay like a nice word. So I hope that I gave you a good kind of framework how it works. It becomes part of the vision. You have your areas that you want to be active, and you have your KPIs, and you go about it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Lillian, for this. May I now go to Mark Hempstead. Mark, what happened in the market in the past few years with ESG? Did you see investors being increasingly interested in ESG-related investments? And if so, in which areas and why?
Yeah, well, first I would say thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here and joining this esteemed group. I think the simple and direct answer to your question is yes, absolutely. I think the focus, the interest, and importantly, the activity of investors has increased dramatically over the last few years. And I think that as each year goes by, the acceleration of that interest only increases further. And I think last year was a really important reflection of this trend overall, because there is this perception that ESG investing is something, it's niche, it's a passing trend. And so as soon as you have a challenging market environment, investors are going to revert away from these investments. Well, last year you had tremendous volatility, you had major economic disruption, and the opposite happened. You saw the fastest pace of increase of ESG flows in history. So I think that's a really important proof statement for this conversation overall. In terms of what's driving this, it's multifaceted. I think it starts with the changing world. Climate change, population growth, diminishing natural resources, social issues that are more in focus. None of these are new issues by any means, but I think there is a greater sense of urgency and greater awareness, more so than there ever has been. And in turn, consumers are asking, they're demanding for corporations to be more socially and environmentally responsible, and corporations are responding. But I think the biggest catalyst for the increase in activity has been return potential for investors. Once you started to see the potential and the results of premium returns as it related to ESG related investments, the floodgates opened, and you just open yourself up to such a more broad universe of potential investors. And that was key. And that showed that this is not just a passing trend. This is truly a transformation that's taking place across industry. In terms of particular areas of focus, I think environmental and climate solutions seem to be the most top of mind, also areas where you have the most shared interest globally, but equally social issues. Last year further exposed the inequalities in the world. There's an urgency to address those, and consumers want to see their companies reflecting that urgency.
Fantastic. Thank you for this, Mark. I would like now to move on to His Excellency, Mr. Tsakiris, and take the country level response to that. So, Your Excellency, over the past few years, this government has given tremendous emphasis on attracting more startups and SMEs, small, medium-sized enterprises, active in all technology-intensive sectors in the country, such as health, digital, energy, etc. These are all perceived as ESG-friendly businesses. Does the government believe that these businesses can create value for the country? And should this sort of businesses, not the large ones, but startups and SMEs, actually incorporate ESG in their business model?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me in this very important panel and very interesting panel. And in particular with this topic, which I think is something that it will drive almost everything, not only in the long future, but also in the near future. Coming to your question, let me start by saying that, and it's very well known that the global startup economy is growing year after year. For example, the US is creating nearly 3 billion euros in value, which is a figure which is more or less a G7 economy. And despite that, again, taking as a measurement the US, which the startup companies are, let's say, accounting for 15% of the businesses, they create by far the biggest percentage in employment. In Europe, of course, we are lagging, and in Greece, we are lagging compared to the US, but we should soon expect the same also here. Now, startups, wherever they are placed, the value that they are creating is multiple of that of the traditional company. This is proven in many ways. And this is purely because they include the element of high growth, which obviously and exponentially is increasing the impact in all the areas of an economy, also in the social sector. When it comes to Greece, the Greek government is not only attracting startups, but is also investing in startups. We have created several programs, investment programs, equity investment programs, that they are co-investing with venture capital and private equity funds and investors from abroad in Greek startup companies. When it comes to the value creation, let's not forget the brain gain that in the last months, I would say the last year, we have gained in Greece. So we see Greeks that they have left abroad to come back to work for Greek startups. And also a very important element for us is that the Greek startup ecosystem is becoming to be visible in foreign investors, either financial or strategic investors. And this is proven by some exits or new investments that Greek startups have achieved over the last months. So that's why also we're here when it comes to the policy in the ministry, we are trying not to value startups on a with a strict financial valuation, but value them on actually value creation. Now, on your second part of your question about if those startups should encompass ESG strategy, I think is by nature, first of all, they have to do it, and they have to be, they ought to be fully aligned with ESG policies, simply because with this way they can let's say, increase the rate to be successful. And this is for several reasons. First of all, by adopting an ESG policy or strategy, a startup obviously might secure more investment as modern investors are considering ESG as a factor in their decision-making processes more and more. Additionally, we see currently that there are purely ESG dedicated investors, and it was said before from previous speakers. Secondly, by adopting this type of approach, they can attract more talented employees, because there are individuals, there are high talented employees that they are looking for this type of companies, and also they're increasing their brand equity. The third and most important, according to me, factor is the risk mitigation, and in particular when it comes to civil litigation, environmental issues, etc. So there is a lot of reasons for startups to encompass ESG strategy, and there's no reason not to.
That's quite clear. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I will now invite Mrs. Laskaridis, Chloe. Let's just now discuss a little bit. You're going to be wearing your hat, your charitable foundation, your NGO hat now. And from the side of the AC Laskaridis Charitable Foundation, NGOs play an important role in the promotion of the ESG agenda. And I would like us to understand a little bit better on which areas does your organization, the AC Laskaridis Charitable Foundation, focuses its activities, ongoing initiatives, and why did you choose those specific areas?
Good evening, and thank you for having me, firstly. The ACLCF is a relatively new foundation, having been set up in 2016. We focus on four main pillars. These are the environment, with a focus on marine protection and preservation, entrepreneurship, social support, and heritage. I'm going to elaborate a bit more on the first pillar, that of environment, and more specifically marine protection, because that is our primary focus, and it takes up more than 50% of our resources and our efforts. As a family, we've always been very passionate about preserving our seas. My earliest memory is of being on a beach holiday with my family, and my dad handing us out huge garbage bags and telling us to start cleaning up the beaches. So I think that's where the passion sort of started. Obviously, we're Greek. Greece has the longest coastline in Europe. And it's the health of our coastline is extremely important, for human health, for the protection of all the marine species, our economy, and obviously it's a huge component of our national identity. To that end, the foundation started by performing extensive cleanups of beaches, removing tons of litter, which in many cases had been left for decades on our shores. The litter is recorded, it is weighed, it is photographed, and all that in an effort for us to understand the extent of the pollution and what causes this pollution. The results are then shared with our academic partners in order to grow the national database that exists on marine pollution. This is how we started. In 2019, we acquired the Typhoon. This is the name of the ship, and this is why eventually the project became named the Typhoon Project. This is a 72-meter special purpose vessel, and this has greatly expanded our capacity to do our beach cleanups. It operates year-round. It has 5 inflatable, smaller boats that go to inaccessible beaches and clears them completely of rubbish. In the course of 19 months that we've had the Typhoon, we've cleaned 1,470 beaches, removed approximately 180,000 tons of litter. And our aim, a bit of a lofty one, but let's see, our aim is to clean the entire Greek coastline within the next 5 years. So this is the basic pillar of what we do, and obviously education has to go hand in hand with this, because it's not just about cleaning, it's also about educating people not to continue littering. So we run a lot of projects with the help of local communities, lots of educational projects geared towards students aged 6 to 18, as well as awareness raising campaigns for the general public. And finally, the state of marine pollution in our country indicates that cleaning is not enough. We also need to eliminate the source of the pollution. And I must say here that 33% of everything, all the garbage collected, is plastic pieces. So we were honored to partner with the Ministry of Environment and Energy in an effort to eliminate single-use plastics from Greece. And hopefully Greece will become one of the first countries in Europe that will gradually eliminate single-use plastics.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chloe. I've got a second question for you at this stage. How did authorities and local communities respond to your initiatives?
So, of course, in order for us to succeed, we have to cooperate with a number of stakeholders. Number one being the government, which needs to grant us permission to sail the Typhoon and to reach all the beaches that we do reach. But also local authorities and, as you say, local communities. We need to have local engagement because otherwise we're just a glorified rubbish collector. And thankfully, both local authorities and communities have been incredibly supportive. We also try to make them feel like they are involved in our projects and that we value their contribution. We, again, educate as much as possible. And our goal is to provide enough information and inspiration to local authorities and local communities in order for them to then preserve our seas and our shores without the constant need for our intervention.
Thank you very much, Chloe. That's extremely interesting, and we'll get a chance to further discuss about stakeholders' importance in this, in ESG in general. Now, let us, move on to what is called, what I like calling the Pandemic Pandemonium, and just see a little bit the implications that the pandemic had on ESG and how ESG grew up through the pandemic. Chloe, I will now invite you to wear your other hat, that from LAMSA, and let's just put ESG aside for a moment. Can you briefly explain to us the main challenges that hospitality, for example, faced as an industry due to the pandemic?
Obviously, just like many sectors during this pandemic, hospitality has suffered tremendously. Continual lockdowns, government measures, of course, worst of all, travel restrictions, with quarantine in various countries, restrictions that keep changing has made 2020 and now 2021 into incredibly difficult years for hospitality. Additionally, people's fear of either going somewhere and not being able to come home or getting sick has created further challenges. Greece and more particularly Athens, and I will speak more about Athens just because most of our hotels are based in Athens, is a flight destination. So we're not like other European capitals where you can drive from various other countries in Europe. You have to fly to get here. So it has been difficult to get visitors and to keep the city busy, to fill our hotels. So that just getting people to come has been a challenge and continues to be a challenge. Another great challenge is the loss of corporate business, the loss of events. We're all here. We're not in the Grand Bretagne holding a nice, proper face-to-face conference. So this has been a great blow to the hospitality industry. Again, Athens specific, the lack of cruise business, the lack of Americans. We're a city that really relies on that business. So it has been difficult and will continue, unfortunately, to be difficult, not just this year, but probably next year as well. On a more sort of social level, holding on to good members of staff, hotels have been semi-operational, some have been closed. A lot of staff are on suspension, so holding on to good members of staff, keeping them motivated has been extremely difficult, and I'm sure it's not just for us. So it's been a very challenging time, but obviously not all doom and gloom. There's a lot of pent-up demand. I'm sure once people feel safe, and once governments reopen countries, once travel is established again, I'm sure everything will normalize. Just not yet, unfortunately.
No, thank you very much for your input, Chloe. And I will now invite Mrs. Alexeou. Dear Maria, Ms. Chloe just described the difficulties that businesses face. And my question, which I think it's natural to everyone in the corporate world, is environment, circular economy, society, public health, human rights, stakeholders' rights. Amidst the pandemic and the financial upheaval and the problems that businesses face, how compatible are sustainability targets with the business's main objective, which is ultimately profit?
Thank you, Isabella, and congratulations for this great opportunity we have today to raise very important issues that are not really easy to answer. But at the same time, it is good to hear the different experiences and sharing of practices that we have. And I really thank you for that, because I have very, very positive, let's say, aspects of the discussion we are having today. Allow me to say that the pandemic is not just another crisis. It's a shock. That's something different. We had another crisis a couple of years ago, and we have gone through many crises after the Second World War, we may say. But what we experience right now is something different. And I think this shock is what really justifies that even before the shock, we have started not discussing about profit anymore. It was said already. We started discussing about purpose. What is the corporate purpose? Why companies are here and how they can stay alive, resilient, and sustainable in the long term. This is the discussion really, and it has started, allow me to say, before this shock we're experiencing right now. It is just that now the question really, it has become very, very urgent. Is there reason to operate as a corporation to make profits, and actually short-term profits as many years ago? Is this the reason we built companies and organizations? Or there is another reason, that is to serve the needs of society? Allow me to say, as we look to any charter of any organization, either a startup or a 120-year-old company, for example, we will see that in our charters, the reason of existence is to serve the needs of people and society. So the shock of the pandemic has made this really understanding that the question is not how we make profits, but the question is how we create sustainable value is now the key question we need to answer. So the pandemic just makes this question very urgent to be answered. That is the great, let's say, experience. We go through this shock. So this is the reason, allow me to say, that although we discuss about sustainable development more than 30 years now, and we have exceptional examples of good practice, like the examples we already heard from Coca-Cola or Chloe, still we have not transformed in a state of mind, in a culture, if you like, that will put the human needs and the value at the core of what we do, of what we design for today and tomorrow. And allow me to say, maybe this is the major challenge we have to face today, corporations and political authorities, how we will build back better by putting this question at the top of our plans. Thank you.
That's quite interesting. Thank you very much, Maria. Mark, I'm going to move now to you because I want to hear the investor side, the market side. So I'll be a little bit cynical and ask you, Mark, where is that in ESG? Some say that the pandemic showed that ESG is nothing more than an ethical or philanthropic window dressing that comes at cost of financial performance. They also highlight the lack of empirical data to support otherwise. What is your response to that criticism?
Yeah, I think, well, first, ESG and impact investing are different things, but I think within either that we talk about, there has long been the perception that if by investing in these things you're giving up return, or that you need to give up profit if you are going to focus on ESG. And it's just not the case. If you actually look, companies with higher ESG ratings have actually performed better than competition. If you just take a global equity index versus a global ESG index since 2007, that ESG index has actually outperformed broad equity index with lower volatility overall. So that is a key point. The outperformance is often greatest when you have the periods of biggest challenge. 2020, what we're talking about, was a great example of that. And to me, it makes sense with what we're all saying. ESG is about creating long-term value at a company. It's dedicating the time, the resources, the corporate strategy to think about resiliency, to think about the bigger picture, whether it be governance or diversity of employees or diversity of your board, employee satisfaction and retention, long-term climate risks. And there is absolutely a correlation to show that companies with high ESG ratings tend to be well managed. They tend to have higher profitability, and importantly, better risk controls. And that is something that is perhaps the most critical element to this. And that can all lead to better long-term performance. So from the investment standpoint, as more and more investors are starting to see this, as they're getting more and more information and reporting, that's why you've seen the increased amount of activity and interest. I would also look at this another way and say, investment potential is forward-looking, and everything that we've been talking about, consumer preferences changing, the regulatory initiatives that are being supportive, all the innovation, the startup community that we talked about, are moving with such great momentum that investors that are positioning themselves behind this have a tremendous growth opportunity. Impact investing is some of the most exciting things about this are the themes which are the most important from an impact perspective. Climate change, education, healthcare are also some of the most significant and transformational growth opportunities in the world. And I think that's just a key element, that growth and impact, or profit and ESG, are absolutely not mutually exclusive. And that's really important to this overall conversation.
No, that's very clear. Thank you for that, Mark. Yanis, Professor Ioannou, did the pandemic change the ESG priorities at the board of directors level? Have you seen how difficult was it, how challenging was it for BODs to reconcile short-term with long-term goals during the pandemic?
Absolutely. And I'm going to echo here something that Maria was saying earlier about COVID-19 being a shock. And not like previous crises we have gone through. I would say that because it was a shock, it had huge implications. So first of all, in my view, it has shaken this false sense of safety and security that we had in the system, that we've been able to dominate nature, that the capital system is flawless, and therefore we can do whatever we want without consequences. It took a coronavirus to bring the entire global economy to its knees. That's very important to take into account if you're a board member. Second of all, it has forced us to rethink the social contract, the importance of healthcare, but also in terms of what are our priorities as a society. How much do we value nurses, doctors, the healthcare system, but also the people that work in retail, or, allowed us the luxury to have food on the table in the middle of a pandemic. So all of these are critical considerations that, of course, there should be at top of mind for board members. And at the same time, in the ESG, they have highlighted the role of S in addition to the role of E that we have traditionally focused on. And the third component I'm going to highlight here is the role of government. We've lived in a system and through many decades where big corporates were fighting against governments. We lobbied against, for very small and often ineffective governments. But you know what? When everything was shutting down, where did all of these businesses go when they wanted a bailout? They went to the governments. Who could tell us stay at home because that's what the public good requires? It's the governments. So it has reinstated, if you like, the role of governments and their ability, if used effectively, to actually bring about solutions to our problems. And the fourth I'm going to highlight is the very, very significant role of experts and data-driven, evidence-based decision-making. That is precisely why every night in our screens we have epidemiologists that tell us how this pandemic is evolving and what can we do to combat the pandemic. This has not always been the case. There's been a whole war in terms of climate denial, for instance. I am now in a country where people were saying, well, we've had enough of experts and other stuff like that. So now we are reinforcing the role of experts and data-driven decision-making as we should. So those are in terms of the big macro kind of impacts that inevitably are going to find their way into the boardroom. Now, in terms of the trade-offs, it has certainly accelerated some trends, but also intensified some of these trade-offs. And it's always important to think, by the way, that sustainability is not easy. If it was easy, everybody would do it, right? I don't know of anybody that doesn't want an innovative company. That doesn't mean that everyone is going to have an innovative company. There's no free lunch out there, despite what sustainability gurus might tell you. Find a stakeholder, it's win-win, dance kumbaya, and the world is a better place. It doesn't work that way. It's about really understanding the trade-offs, and only some of the companies are going to be effective in dealing with them. So those trade-offs have been brought center stage because of the pandemic. And in many ways, they have awakened boards. And I would say, I'll finish on this one, awaken them to the fact that, our companies might be lacking the skills, the experience, and the knowledge necessary to even address these issues. Why? Because traditionally, we've been managing within a narrowly focused and sometimes narrowly minded economic context and ignoring social and environmental implications.
Wow, that's very, very interesting. Yanis, thank you so much. Let me ask two further questions in this section, and I kindly ask you to provide succinct answers because I'm a little bit aware of time. So, Maria, Yanis just said something very interesting about the social aspects of the pandemic with regard to companies. The price of the pandemic appears to have been paid primarily by low-paid frontline workers who lack digital skills, and surprise, by women. Has the pandemic placed a bright light on S in ESG and brought it back to the game?
Yes, it has actually, to be specific. And I think what it has brought back more, it is, first of all, the need for solidarity. It was mentioned earlier. It became clear to all of us that we have to do it together and with responsibility. So differences like low-skilled and high-skilled does not matter so much as it is right now, because allow me to say one of the heroes of the pandemic in terms of professionals was all these boys and girls carrying different kind of things in our homes. And allow me to say, during the pandemic, we saw a huge company, a global player, to allow this, let's say, low-skilled workforce, who are the couriers, to get to get unionized. So this type of needs we have to address today, cannot be addressed without some sense of solidarity among all of us. And there are, allow me to say, 3 words or 3 principles, if you like, that are connecting all stakeholders right now for any company. The first is transparency. We need to know more. We need to know the truth. Either it is about the pandemic from the lips of the government, or it is about the measures that the company has taken to protect us. Either we are in management or we are in the front line. The first is transparency then. The second is authenticity. We need to have authentic relations. So what connects now the workforce with the legal entities, the corporations and the employers is authentic relations, trust that helps to commit to an extra effort that we need to take and go beyond the line. So if I don't trust you, I'm not going to put my life at stake. And the third one is to relate based on the truth, on what is really happening, and if possible, what is going to happen tomorrow. So people right now put us at the front because they are in need of taking all these 3 elements to help themselves to survive and to continue be active and let's say reliable partners in this crisis.
Fantastic. Thank you, Maria. Mrs. Nectariou, Lilian, did the pandemic force your organization to recalibrate its ESG goals, both internally in terms vis-a-vis your employees and externally with regard to the society? And were you forced to adapt to the respective action plan in order to achieve your goals because of the pandemic? And if so, how?
Yeah, I have to say that everything is so well said, and I couldn't agree more with most of what has been already said so far. So the pandemic, I wouldn't use the word force, because indeed the pandemic actually came as an accelerator of a transformation that has been taking place towards a purposeful leadership, towards collaboration in the key of how you do things and how you set up an ecosystem around you to make sure that you land your initiatives and your projects. The pandemic has actually been an accelerator on the good side of things that we have been already working on, but also on the downside of things. It has created new inequalities, especially when it comes to those who are having the knowledge, the digital skills, and those who don't. Those who have to stay at home more than the other women, for example. They have brought several groups in a more disadvantaged position than the past and has created more inequalities in that way. But all these things were things that were underlying trends, I would say. People asking for more transparency on the products they consume, people asking for more transparency on the corporate responsibility practices. So all these things somehow exploded with the pandemic, and overnight you had to be, you had to have your solutions ready to launch. So in that sense, in a crisis, you have to really change mode and start seeing how you can make it to survive. You have to change mode and focus on what is of primary importance for your business to survive, but also for the community and the society around you. So yes, in a way, we had to, focus on how we can support the healthcare system, like most of the corporations around did. We had to also see how we can support the most vulnerable groups, and we did that with sponsorships around the healthcare system, but also with support through the municipality of Athens and the programs about offering help at home to the vulnerable groups of citizens. But then again, you can't lose sight of the bigger picture, and you can't lose sight of how this that happens now links with what will happen then in the future. And in a way, although for the short term, we did change course and focused on the immediate needs and the immediate relief. In the mid and long term, we had to make sure that everything we do was linked also with our long-term sustainability goals around the areas that I mentioned at the beginning: waste, water, and women. So just to give you an example, within the pandemic, the HoReCa sector, and Chloe mentioned before, was one of the most hit. And we launched an initiative, Future Loading, that was all about upskilling the small and medium-sized HoReCa businesses in order for them to be able to survive for the short term, but also for the mid-long term. And sustainability toolkits was part of the way we supported HoReCa through these initiatives. And actually on the year 2 that we will continue with this initiative and further scale it up, sustainability will be the key element into it, because at the end of the day, starting from an immediate need, how to offer support to the HoReCa small and medium-sized businesses, we move into the more mid-term and long-term need, that is how in a country like Greece, with such a big HoReCa sector and such a big coastline, you can create a zero-waste HoReCa network that, HoReCa owners are probably the ones who can help immensely with the waste created in the coastline that Chloe was referring earlier. So you start for a very short term, and then you move in a mid-term and long term, and everything comes together. And then you see that probably all of us in this panel today are helping each of us with their own puzzle around the same issue. And I believe this is the biggest learning of the pandemic, that the problem belongs to everywhere, and so does the solution.
Fantastic. It's the cross-section collaboration that we mentioned earlier. I would like now to pass to His Excellency Mr. Takis and ask the final question, because I'm aware of the time. I have to repeat this. So, Your Excellency, as a result of the pandemic, the EU and the Portuguese presidency have outlined the promotion of human rights and the enhancement and strengthening of the European social model as a priority. Has the Greek government's strategic priorities regarding ESG changed due to the pandemic?
Thank you. Actually, my answer will be quite short. First of all, I believe that the strong social model is purely correlated with a resilient economy and society. And the pandemic has evidently proven that this is a one-way road. So we cannot, we cannot divert. When it comes to the Greek government, many policy and legislative actions of this government have strong elements of ESG. There are many examples, such, for example, the new company governance law, etc. In the forthcoming months, this will be mainstreamed, and as the pandemic is acting as a catalyst, it will also accelerate this way throughout the whole Europe, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and for this very interesting and brief answer. Now let's just move to the third and last part of our session of the discussion before we move to the Q&A. ESG in the post-pandemic area. We're going to break this down to two parts. The first leg will be the challenges, and then we'll be discussing the opportunities. With regard to the challenges, my first question will go to Mrs. Alexiou. Maria, are the existing sustainability metrics indeed reflective of the business's performance, respect, or responsibility, accountability, and sustainability that you mentioned before? Or do you think there's room there for improvement?
There are good news for that. You have plenty of standards. Actually, according to some studies, since recently we have built worldwide more than 500 sustainability report or ESG or CSR or whatever you call it standards. Global standards, principles-based standards, key performance related standards, and so on and so forth. So we have plenty of standards already created by prestigious organizations. We have very good, quite good number of companies as well who have been leading this way, and they have been standard setters themselves for their own sector. Examples also include Coca-Cola, of course. And we have already approximately 300 ESG ratings that are used by investors globally, if I'm correct, at least according to what the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment Initiative has recorded. So yes, we have the standards, and yes, we have some companies who are leading the way and using the standards in a meaningful and impactful way. And we do have also sectors who are doing also the same, because sectors like the banking sector, like the energy sector, like the construction sector, or also the public sector, are the ones who are expected to move first in this transition phase because of their impact to other sectors. So impact is also important in this equation. What we don't have is, one, a common language. At least tonight, we had a common language also, although we didn't use the same terms. So we don't have a common language, and we try to build this in Europe, and we hope that this will become global. We don't have a common understanding of the use of standards. So although the standards exist, each one is using them in its own way. Third, apart from discipline with the standards, we need also to have a better policy alignment and policy cohesion, because we create confusion. And companies and boards, and John will allow me to ask his comment on that, they want clear rules of the game. This confusion does not help, not companies to make the right decisions and look in the long-term perspective, utilizing the tools that are available for ESG investment or impact investment, and then stakeholders are getting also confused. And this is really does not help. So create a common language, use the standard the right way, and not duplicating and creating more and more standards, because this will create more confusion, and more policy alignment, both within EU and within national markets. We get to become more mature with that and make it fast.
That's very interesting, Maria. And actually, I had another question in my head for Mark, but I will have that wait for a second. And I will ask Professor Ioannis, because Maria just mentioned something very important about BODs facing this challenge. IFRS, among other institutions, is being urged to develop unified standards. Is it feasible to create a common framework for non-financial information for all businesses? And do you also believe that IFRS would be the right vehicle to use if we want to achieve the standardization of ESG factors?
Isabella, I think it should be, and it has to be, and I hope you've heard the frustration in Maria's voice as well in this alphabet soup of so many different voluntary standards, and then you have integration efforts, and then we have next meta integration efforts to integrate the integration efforts to get to a standard, right? So there's absolutely no question in my mind that we do need that, but let us not forget, by the way, that in order to get to financial standards, we kind of needed the Great Depression to shake us into thinking, oh, wait a second, maybe we need to compare profits across companies, right? So we are going through a period that is moving very quickly compared to how long it took us to arrive at financial standards. Now, as far as IFRS is concerned, I don't want to pick and choose initiatives. I think we definitely need these initiatives, but with respect to IFRS, they did mention, if I'm not mistaken, that they're going to start with climate and they're going to adopt the financial perspective. Is it a good starting point? Yes, but we shouldn't stay there too long. There's so many issues that need to be measured, and there's so many different perspectives in addition to the financial that need to be taken account of. And I'll finish, Isabella, if you allow me, with one note here. We should have the conversation about the reporting and standards, but we should not kind of suffer the fallacy that this is just an issue of measurement, that companies have figured this out, and then the only thing that's left is for us to go in, measure it, and then invest accordingly. Far from it. It is a moving target. Companies are still experimenting with practices. Some of these social issues are emerging as we speak. Sadly and tragically, for instance, as a society, we didn't care about the gender pay gap until very recently. So that's an emerging social issue. Any standard should be designed to be dynamic, to account for the momentum that some of these issues have as we go over time. So the IFRS initiative, as well as the WEF initiative and so many others, great. We should all put them into a room and close the door until they come out with a standard. Extremely useful, while keeping in mind the dynamic nature of the underlying actions and issues that we are trying to measure.
Thank you very much for that very interesting answer, Yanis. Mark, I actually want your input with regard to the market and investors. So measuring investment returns is straightforward. It's quite easy. I mentioned IFRS before. Measuring ESG or impact in general is not. And does the lack of a unified reporting standard bring challenge to investors?
Yeah, I think a lot of good answers have been said. Just the lack of a commonality just creates some type of confusion where the goal just has to be able to give investors as much information as possible to be able to make their decisions. So yes, it presents a challenge, but I do think there has been a tremendous amount of progress that's been made in impact investing. There's the Impact Management Project, which is different funds and practitioners coming together to try to determine together some global consensus in terms of measuring, managing, and reporting on impact. I think, as to not repeat another angle of where we can get to some commonality in terms of ESG integration is in regulation. ESG regulations have doubled, I think, since 2015. It all needs to be around transparency and consistency. The recent EU Commission Action Plan is now clearly defining what are sustainable activities and what are not. So it's defining the activities and the metrics that are going to be measured, and it's also introducing obligations for disclosure. So I think that's an important part to try to get to corporations at somewhat of the same level. But it's obvious from the investment side, when you do get that standardization, and the key point there is it is a moving target, but when you do get to somewhat of that standardization, it allows for comparison. And that's what investors are trying to do. It allows you to try to determine who are the leaders and the laggards for the industry, and that allows you to make your decision on who you want to invest with or who you want to exclude. But it all comes back to what I think the goal that we're all trying to say is all of this is behind improving ESG metrics, improving ESG outcomes, but you cannot improve what you cannot measure. It is a moving target, but the progress that has come to this point is why you've seen such a growth in the industry, but it's why it needs to be a continuous focus for it to continue to improve and continue to grow.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Mark. Let's just now move on to the last section, which is the opportunities that will arise as a result of ESG in the post-pandemic world. My question will go to Professor Ioannou. Yannis, looking at the 2021 United Nations Climate Change Conference and the implementation of the European Green Deal, do you believe that in that sort of argument on whether ESG has already get mainstream, the answer is it is already mainstream? And also, do you think that it has the potential to become the mother of all disruptions?
Great question. So allow me to make a semantic change here. I don't think that it's sustainability that's becoming mainstream. I think it's finally the mainstream waking up to the fact that it needs to be sustainable. So it's a very important symbolic distinction here that we need to make. And I think this is reflected deeply into all this, as you mentioned, this institutional discussions that we have. We live in a world in which the European Central Bank is putting on the table this idea of whether, we should continue with neutrality, if that means essentially, tolerating, all these polluting sectors of the economy, right? So the fact that I'm not a macroeconomist, I don't know the right answer to that, but the fact that we are having that debate and rethinking the foundations of some of our institutions towards sustainability, it's a huge and right step in the right direction. I'm also encouraged by the fact that organizations like the SEC are already setting up a task force in order to battle greenwashing. The new European disclosure regulations in sustainable finance are going to have a huge ripple effect throughout the world, and not just at the European Union, in terms of what companies should disclose. So all of these are strong signs, solid signs that we're moving in the right direction. I mean, of course, we can always discuss, is it the right speed or is it the right magnitude of change, but at least the direction is correct. Now, as far as the mother of all disruptions is concerned, absolutely. And I'll link this back to my previous comments that sustainability is not easy. And there's a huge lack of knowledge and expertise out there that is required. And forget not, this is about saving the planet in which we all live. And it's not really a choice if we want to survive, right? Yet we still have an uphill battle to fight in terms of mindsets, ideologies, right? I mean, look what happened in the US under Trump, right? It's a breath of fresh air that at least now we have the Biden-Harris administration and a global leader that, can at least try to help us with this ineffective global governance that we need in order to bring sustainability and climate change in particular in center stage. So this is a tsunami of changes that are required for companies. It is the mother of all disruption exactly because we lack the foundation to deal with it. And we need to understand that going forward, there's two paths. Either existing companies are going to adapt, or it was rightly pointed out earlier, it's going to be the Teslas of the world, the Beyond Meat, the Impossible Foods of the world that are going to come in and replace failing incumbents. And in the long run, look at the corporate graveyard, packed with once iconic brands. So as an investor, I would really worry about, which of those stories am I betting on? Where is the choice really going to come from?
That's very interesting, actually, Yannis, because I think what you just said shows that where sustainability has actually become a battlefield out of which winners and losers will emerge. And it is actually possible we're going to see iconic brands, who fail to adapt to the new world, simply move, head towards the corporate graveyard, which would be, impossible in the past. So I think that's a very interesting comment. And similarly, I understand also that that applies to countries as well, who fail to understand that importance. I would now like to ask two questions to Ms. Nectariou, to Lilian, and to Ms. Laskaridis, actually, because they're quite similar in nature. I will start first with Lilian. Lilian, from your experience, do consumers prefer brands that emphasize on sustainable practices?
Absolutely. I can answer this in a very short and fast way. Yes. I mean, what is interesting is to understand that the way people see sustainable practices start from exactly the product itself. So when consumers talk about sustainable practices, they don't only mean the waste or the CO2 footprint or the water stewardship or things like that. They actually start from the product itself, because this need for sustainable practices starts actually from the point that the people are looking for healthier options. And what we see from the many consumer kind of research or dialogue, I would say dialogue more than research that we are running, is that almost 9 out of 10 people, whatever way you measure it and however you're trying to put the question, believe that a healthy diet is part of a healthy living, and the health of the planet starts from the health of the person, and actually the way they understand the planet and the way they conceptualize the planet is at the level of their neighborhood or their country. So it starts from me, it starts from the way I eat, the way I treat myself, the way I am in terms of psychology, and then it moves to the neighborhood, to the planet, to the society outside. So we have to be careful on the company side when we talk sustainability. Yes, the environment and all the practice around waste, etc., are very much in line, but we have to really start from the product. We have to really start from offering people what they really ask: transparency and the means for a healthier living, and the means, the tools for well-being on the body and the soul. So I would like to put this parameter in our discussion, since you're asking this, Isabella. And this actually takes a priority with companies like Coca-Cola, because we have to be, we have to be true to what we say. We cannot say we care for the planet and we not have a portfolio to support health and well-being. Mm-hmm. So for the companies, it also starts with the product, because this is how people define sustainable practices at the core of it.
No, that's actually quite interesting. And I will come back to that, Lilian, to ask a question. But first, I want one further question to you. But first, I would like to get the high-end client side and get input from Chloe. Chloe, your hotels focus on high-end clients and guests in who are interested in luxurious product. Is it easy to adopt and implement an ESG strategy in your case?
So pre-COVID, sustainability was actually one of the top 5 reasons that someone would pick a hotel or a destination. So it really has gone up in people's agenda and in their list of priorities. Unfortunately, obviously due to COVID, health and safety is now number 1. Which has set hotels especially back a little bit. It's a fine balance, I would say, catering to the luxury guest, but also trying to be as environmentally friendly as possible, especially when it comes to properties like ours, which are very old and very historic. I think for newer properties, if you're setting up, a beautiful hotel in the Maldives from scratch, you can put in all the new technologies that exist obviously now, and you can do things a lot better. So for us, being the hotel that we are, we've started small by trying obviously to eliminate single-use plastics. Again, unfortunately, this was pre-COVID, living through a pandemic now, and everything needs to be sanitized, everything needs to be individually wrapped. Hopefully soon we can, stop using these kinds of practices and go back to normal. So I would say for newer properties, it's easy. Guests appreciate your efforts. They do want you to be sustainable. They do want you to be environmentally friendly. As I said, it's quite high up in their list of priorities. For older properties, it's a bit harder. I mean, we ran a scheme where we tried to lessen the water pressure a little bit in order to conserve water. This was not well liked by guests. So, I mean, I think it's a bit of a fine balance. Although, when there's a will, there's a way. So as I said, we start small, single-use plastics, and then slowly we do plan on becoming eventually minimizing as much as possible our carbon footprint. But obviously, when it comes to a building like the Grand Bretagne, this takes a lot of research. We need a lot of consultants to sort of advise the best way to do this. But I do think it is definitely achievable and definitely appreciated even by high-end luxury clients.
Thank you, Chloe. Actually, I'm going to close a little bit this section about companies and then move on to the macro impact and ask His Excellency Mr. Takiris and the investor side, asking Mark if the final questions for our discussion. But I want first to close this thing about companies and just ask Lillian, what are the lessons you've learned from the pandemic vis-a-vis ESG in general? Will your sustainability strategy remain unaltered post-COVID? Or do you see that you will further focus on the other two sides, as you've mentioned previously, of two other parts of ESG and not just the environment, meaning the social and the governance sides?
Yeah, I think the learnings, I can wrap up the learnings in a few things. The first is, we need to collaborate. We need to really look for partnerships that may have not been straightforward in the previous times, and now you can find kind of strange allies in places where you traditionally wouldn't even look for. So every part of the society, the government, the NGOs, the academia, every part of the society has a part of the knowledge, and to really go about sustainability, as Professor Ioannou said earlier, we need all the knowledge, and no one can have all the knowledge themselves. We need everyone around the table in order to have the whole picture. So one is about collaboration. The other thing is that, again, as it was said from the professor, things are dynamic, are changing. Adaptability is the name of the game. One thing is that we are not, no one is the owner of a single truth, but we are all on the journey of revealing the truth. So it's a learning journey, course correct all the time, and you better go for action than go for testing and theorizing things a lot. So it's about being together because no one can have the knowledge on their own, and we need all the knowledge, all the possible source of knowledge we can have. Is about adaptability, and is about actually course correcting all the time on a learning journey more than on a journey of achievement and reaching a point where this is it and this is the end. There is no end. This is more of an ongoing circle, like the name says, circular economy, than a highway destination.
Thank you very much for this, Lillian. I'll now just focus a little bit on my questions and wrap up our discussion section with them regarding the economy. I want us to see both the investor side and the macroeconomy from the government's perspective. So I will first ask Mark. Mark, given your specialization in private equity and impact investing, could you talk a little bit more about the opportunities that there will be out there post-pandemic, and perhaps talk to us about some of the themes that you see that they're going to be most compelling?
Yeah, sure. I don't think that the pandemic necessarily created any new themes altogether, but I absolutely do think that it accelerated themes. It really put things into focus for investors for different opportunities. But there's a lot of different potential opportunities. I also feel like I have to say, I'll generalize a bit in terms of these opportunities, but it totally depends on where you are in the world and the particular country that we're dealing with. I mean, in some places we're talking about Tesla, in some places we're talking about consistent access to electricity. In some places we're talking about Beyond Meat, in some places we're talking about just the bare minimum of a balanced diet. So it totally depends on where you are, but I think some of the themes are absolutely shared globally and can be used globally. Probably the front of mind or the broadest opportunity is in climate and environmental solutions. It's a repeated theme that I think we've all been talking about. The EU Green New Deal is a fantastic catalyst for that. Renewable energy transformation, the electrification of transport. I do think a lot of the interesting investment opportunities for these things are the enabling technologies behind that. It's not picking a car company. It's saying if we're going to have millions of more electric vehicles on the road, we need a global infrastructure of fast and efficient charging stations. If you want more people to use solar energy, we need software platforms to allow people to find a solution and be able to book and install easily. So thinking about different elements like that. Agriculture technology is an area that's getting a lot of interest. If we are going to feed this growing population, we need to be more efficient with resources and have a broader focus on health outcomes. So anything from vertical farming to the marine economy to alternatives for pesticides or cellular agriculture are all different fascinating things that are going on in the space. The circular economy, which I won't repeat. And then I think it's not just about climate solutions. Education technology. This was already an accelerating trend pre-COVID, and it has only gotten more critical. And this isn't just kids learning on Zoom for a period of time, but it's looking at how digital solutions can help to dramatically expand the quality and the reach of education globally. And it's a place where digitalization is far behind. And it's not just childhood education, it's employment. It's upskilling a workforce, trying to teach new skills. We talked about the pandemic's negative influence that this has had, and this is a way that can potentially help. So it's using technology to help make basic services more effective, more efficient, whether it's education, employment, basic financial services, healthcare. So a lot of different underlying opportunities, and I think investors are very much focused on this, seeing the potential, and that's the most important thing.
No, thank you very much for the insights, Mark. That's very interesting, actually. And now that we know the areas where we need to pay more attention, Your Excellency, we need to find the funds. So the real question now comes to you. 1 trillion, if I'm not mistaken, euros. This is the green investment wave that the European Commission seeks to mobilize over the next 10 years. With its newly launched European Green Deal investment plan. Are we ready as a country to use this capital injection towards long-term sustainability goals to promote health, as we mentioned, green growth, digitalization, research and innovation, and support businesses and labor at the same time?
Yes, we are fully ready to deploy any type of funding. Let me tell you that the new programming period of 2027 of the European Union of Structural Funds, as well as a major part of the new Recovery Fund, are geared towards what exactly you have said. So it's about digitalization, R&D, green investments, social impact, and so on and so forth. And we have already submitted our plans to the European Commission for that purpose. I can reassure you that very soon you will see an immense green and digital transformation of Greece. You can see that in our national growth plan, which, as well as the national sectoral plans, like the National Strategy for Energy and Climate, the digital white paper, etc. Let me give you an example of what we have recently done. For example, the Hellenic Development Bank for Investments has procured a 400 million mandate to invest in renewable energy, cyclical economy, and critical infrastructure private equity funds. This 400 million, let's say, will be leveraged with, let's make an assumption, 600 million of private funds, so it makes 1 billion of equity. And if you make the assumption again that this billion of equity can leverage 3 billion of loans, we have immediately 4 billion of funding for renewable energy projects, cyclical economy, etc. Mr. Hempstead understands very well the mechanics of leveraging. So I'm very confident that we have the means and the funds to pursue all these type of initiatives.
Actually, that's fantastic news indeed. And going to have had a better timing for this webinar since it was just yesterday that the Prime Minister announced in the cabinet meeting that there's going to be a lot of work on this areas. I just want to finish by asking you, Your Excellency, the role of the Hellenic Development Bank that you just mentioned is going to be quite important in this new economic environment, isn't it?
Indeed. Actually, Greece was lacking a true promotional institution, a true national development institution. And what we're trying to do is to fill this gap with Hellenic Development Bank. We aim that Hellenic Development Bank will be the major actor when it comes to financial instruments and public interventions in the Greek market. Hellenic Development Bank, which was practically born over 1 year ago during the pandemic, so far has mobilized within less than a year 7 billion of euros in liquidity, assisting Greek enterprises with working capital during that crisis. If I may give you some examples of this, was a guarantee product to support very small enterprises. We are planning a mezzanine program to support high growth and extrovert enterprises. And soon, I'm sure we're going to see specific financial instruments to tackle the microfinance market, to support factoring, etc. So everything about liquidity plus investments, lending on infrastructure projects. On the other hand, the Hellenic Development Bank for Investments, the ex-Taneo, as I said before, for example, it's just procured 400 million private equity fund of funds for infrastructure and renewable energy. In total, has deployed an ambitious 1.5 billion of euros equity programs spanning from technology transfer and seed financing for innovative startups to debt funds, renewable energy, and so on and so forth. So let's say, as we are designing all those new financial tools to support not only growth, but also resilience of the Greek economy, I think ESG will be a key ingredient in all those designs, unavoidable. Thank you.
That's extremely interesting. Thank you for sharing these pieces of information with us tonight. This wraps up the discussion section. I'm quite aware of the time, so I understand we've got a number of questions. So what I will do is that, because we don't have much time, I will start asking each panel speaker one question. And I will start with, with Mark. Mark, why not? So I'll start with you. So there is this astonishing growth in green capital markets. Do you believe that this is a trend that will help promote the ESG agenda? Is it here to stay, or do you think it's going to be a bubble? I know this is not your area of expertise, but based on your information, your understanding.
Yeah, I think it is positive. This is all of these different financing mechanisms are just a way to support the growth of everything we've been talking about. In this case, we're talking about environmental sustainability. The key to the continuous growth is opening these initiatives up to the broader capital markets, so you can have sustained investment support over time. It's the multiplication impact of that original euro. So whether it be green bonds, whether it be impact investing or ESG equity funds, all of this can serve to be that support and take this from being hopefully what people once thought as the niche trend, and it just being the ongoing supported engine that continues to drive, continues to transform the global economy and transform industry.
Thank you, Mark. Another question that I got, actually quite a bit on that. Mrs. Laskaridis, Chloe, what type of initiatives do you think are missing from the ecosystem of NGOs operating in Greece today?
So I don't think there's anything so much that is missing. But I think Mrs. Nectariou mentioned collaboration, and I think that is something that is missing, especially in the NGO sector. Not just collaboration between NGOs, but also collaboration between sort of private foundations and the government. I mean, all these NGOs do, especially the ones that we come in contact with, the more environmentally geared ones. They do tremendous work. There's sometimes some areas are oversaturated, I might say. And in Greece, we tend to sort of want to have our names on things rather than find a way to work together and maybe put personal pride aside a little bit. So I would say what is missing is good cooperation and good collaboration more than anything, because I don't remember who mentioned it, it's a bit of a puzzle. So I think if you get the puzzle pieces to fit correctly, you could do tremendous things. And I don't think we're quite there yet, but obviously we are going towards the right direction.
Thank you, Chloe. That's actually very interesting. I think it applies to all cases. Mrs. Nectariou, Lilian, the questions I'm getting are again relevant to the lessons you've learned from the pandemic vis-a-vis ESG. Is there anything else you would like to add to what you've already, said about potentially other initiatives that you want to launch as Coca-Cola at LAS?
Other learnings out of the other learnings out of the pandemic, other than adaptability, collaboration, and fluidity of things, continuous learning journey. I think a very, very important part of it is that back to what Maria said earlier, we have to put again the people in the epicenter of what we do. And one of the learnings is that there will be no sustainable value for any kind of corporation and for the capital system as a whole if this does not go back to the society. So the way that value is created is becoming more and more circular, and the sooner you get that you are a part in the chain of creating value, and you have to play your role to be sustainable and to survive, the better off we're going to be. Now, of course, as I said, in terms of the initiatives, yes, for us in Coca-Cola, in line with our environmental goals, we have diversity and inclusion. And yes, in the first time after the pandemic, diversity and inclusion will take a bigger part when it comes to upskilling, reskilling the more vulnerable groups, women and the young, with special projects in Greece but also across the world. I don't want to go now into the details of this project because the objective is not to kind of advertise the good work that we're going to do, but I can reassure you that closing the gap on the inequalities that have been created with the pandemic is one of our primary interests, and we will focus there aside our focus on waste and the environment.
Thank you very much, Lilian. I have three more questions. So let me start with Maria. Maria, public health and occupation safety and health. These are two questions that I got for you. Can we draw any conclusions regarding the trends developing around workers' health from the way companies dealt with this issue during the pandemic? And do you think that we can see more about the future of this?
I think in respect to health and safety, the pandemic has taught us many lessons. The first one was not to take health and safety for granted. And although particularly in Greece, we had a very old-fashioned attitude or approach to what health and safety in the workplace is, looking to that in a very narrow, way. Now the health and safety issue is at the top of the agenda. It is actually, along with the diversity and inclusion issue, the most material issues for all companies, no matter what the sector is and no matter what the size is. So either we talk about small and medium-sized enterprises right now, either we talk about the tourism, or we talk about construction, health and safety in the broader sense, within the workplace, but also beyond the workplace, is the most demanding issue to be addressed by corporations, because it is also related to business continuity, allow me to say. Then another element is responsibility. Personal, individual responsibility and corporate responsibility are, let's say, very much used during the pandemic. Let me remind you that our Prime Minister, every time that was coming out to talk about what we are supposed to do to face this situation, was talking about responsibility. So yes, the way we look at the issues, the way we take measures to protect health and safety at the workplace, to allow people to have, to be able to practice their own activities in order to support business continuity and also social continuity, is, let's say, what makes us working every day and revisiting even some of the systems we had in place, and even the way we were looking at these elements. So we revisit and redefine what we do, even for all these topics that traditionally were, let's say, under control, or let's say very well managed, particularly from enterprises that, as Coca-Cola, for example, have a very long-term record on that.
Thank you very much for your input, Maria. Two further questions, and I do apologize to our audience for this, but we've run out of time, and I know it's pretty interesting. They're so interesting, a very robust discussion what we just had, but unfortunately, we have to respect the fact that there's a time limit to everything. Professor Ioannou Yannis, we want your comments on the ousting of Danone's former CEO, Emmanuel Faber. This competition between shareholders and stakeholders, and that was a clear case 2 weeks ago, where we had this example. What are your comments on that? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's taking me into contested territory there, Isabella, but I'll attempt an answer. So here's what I would first say. Like, this is one case. So we cannot extrapolate too much from a case equals one. So we need to be careful about to what extent the learnings from Danone can be extended to other companies. Now, having said that, I think the Danone case very vividly showcases the difficulty and the complexity of the sustainability issue that we've been discussing today, right? I do not agree with all this more sensationalist approach or the clickbait, shareholders versus stakeholders. And that's not the case, right? Because if you look at it should be the case that purpose or sustainability should never ever be a substitute for good management. The two should be synergistic to each other, not substitutes. Because you know what, Isabella? It's the easiest thing in the world to improve your environmental performance if you do that by giving up on your financial performance. Anybody can do that. That's not management. So the difficult challenge is to do both. So if you look at Danone's historical performance, it was sluggish compared to Unilever, compared to Nestle. They overpaid for acquisitions. They were also unlucky because they focused on the bottled water business, and that got hit by the pandemic. A big underlying question: is a bottled water business sustainable to begin with, if we take that definition of sustainability? So it highlights these complexities of the issue, but it also, and I'll finish on that, it highlights the sort of the power of activism and the power sometimes of ESG activism and the pressure and actually the discipline that markets should impose on companies that pursue sustainability, that, they say, well, it's going to pay in the long term. Well, nobody wakes up one day and says, oh, the long term today, let's see if it pays, right? It's the long term is nothing more than a disciplined series of short term. So we need to have that in mind. And by the way, this relates to another case that is evolving in the news as we speak, which is nothing more, the case of Deliveroo and their upcoming IPO. And we've seen investors like Aviva investors, like Legal & General, come out and say, well, I'm going to boycott their IPO because of the way they treat the riders, right? In a way that Uber treats the drivers. So those are things, some of the issues that I would highlight in this case. And of course, only time will tell once we go in Danone and realize the extent to which this actually went beyond CEO ambition. One last thing, think about corporate governance. And when we talk about good corporate governance, we of course distinguish between the role of the chairman and the CEO. Danone, registered as a purpose-led organization, never took that very obvious corporate governance improvement. So we'll obviously need to let more, but from the outside, let's just say that was a case of not so stellar management.
Paraphrasing Bill Clinton here, I would say that it's the F in ESG stupid in a way. And in that sense, we always need to take into consideration the F in the financial aspect when talking about ESG and when management is trying to find that balance. Your Excellency, I will ask you the final question. Sir, you just mentioned before the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, briefly. I understand that the future of Greece is going to be green, digital, and socially fair, if I'm not mistaken. Can someone simply put it that way?
That's the plan. Actually, tomorrow the Prime Minister will present the National Recovery and Resilience Plan. But what he has already mentioned, allow me to repeat it, is that this plan coming through lending and grants has the potential to add another 7% to the GDP, to the Greek GDP over a 6-year horizon, beyond the normal growth of Greek economy, and to create additionally more than 200,000 new jobs. There are more than 160, let's say, projects or investments described in the plan, followed also by reforms that will not only affect the economy, but primarily will affect positively the Greek society. The National Recovery Plan is a huge program and has the potential to mobilize almost 60 billion, if we take into account the 32 billion, which is the EU participation. The public resources can mobilize in total 60 billion of euros. So again, huge number for the Greek economy. And also to answer what you have said, the National Recovery Plan and the new EU structural funds, the known ESPA, have almost the same pillars, with this digital transition in the public and the private sector, increase of the competitiveness of the Greek businesses, research and development, increase of the employment, green economy, and enhancement of health and education. So again, I think everything that at least I have described here is within your ESG framework, more or less.
No,
Thank you.
It sounds extremely optimistic, and I'm pretty sure that our audience this evening just found out business opportunities in the areas they need to put their efforts in by both you, Your Excellency, and Mark Hempstead in terms of the financial aspect. Now, I'm afraid we've run out of time. We're way out of time here. However, I think our discussion was quite robust. Let me briefly summarize the key conclusions of our discussion this evening. First of all, as Professor Ioannou said, sustainability is arguably the largest disruption that the world of business has faced in recent years. And we should not get caught with the labeling. It doesn't matter if we call it ESG, CSR, or whatever, non-financial information. It's all about the same thing. I also understand that the pandemic fortified the importance of ESG, as Mrs. Nectario pointed out, Lilian pointed out. The corporate world has a sort of obligation to the society to design a certain business strategy according to the needs of the community, of stakeholders in general, in order to create value for them and safeguard the next generations. Now, Mark, you've mentioned this a number of times, that sustainability investing is not a passing trend or fad, and investors do believe that integrating ESG factors to a company strategy shields the company from a number of corporate risks. As you've put it, is directly in line. ESG integration is directly in line with how well your company is run and how well you're set up for the long-term risks. Mrs. Alexiou Maria, you highlighted the fact that the pandemic showed the importance of sustainability and social responsibility to make societies and economies more resilient and prosperous in the long run. And the new strategy, the new EU strategy, seeks to enhance the implementation of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals without allowing anyone to be left behind. We need to change also our culture, as you mentioned a number of times, with regard to sustainability, because it's not just enough to have common standards. With regard to NGOs, as Mrs. Laskaridis pointed out, we need to focus more to the actions and to care a little bit about the results rather than who puts its name on it. And a better facilitation between the synergies is going to bring a lot of that in that industry. I understand that you all mentioned, both Mr. Hempstead, Professor Ioannou, and Maria Alexiou, you all showed the importance of a unified sustainability reporting system. We are moving towards convergence with regard to ESG factors and standards, and that is quite an important thing. It's an important territory that will help both the companies and the market understand better each other. And as His Excellency, Mr. Yanis Takiris noted, the implementation of the European Green Deal investment plan in Greece in general will be a huge capital injection, and it will help companies that primarily focus in promoting health, green growth, digitalization, education, research, and innovation. On this note, I'd like to give the floor to our association's chairman, Dr. Vasilis Apostolopoulos. Mr. Apostolopoulos.
Isabella, thank you, and congratulations on your moderation skills as well. I would like also to thank all the speakers and the contributors that made this roundtable possible. A common denominator of the speakers has been the role of the pandemic as a catalyst and accelerator for change across all levels, and the voice amplifier for the proponents of EFG. What became clear, I believe, to all of us is that ESG is a core part of the equation we need to balance if we are to adapt and improve as we exit the peak of the pandemic. Even if it weren't branded as such in the discussion, the key word is leadership. We need fresh leadership, social, corporate, and political, in order to drive change. And today we all participated in a panel that gathered the right mix of speakers and peers that have the capacity to spearhead change in their spheres of responsibility and activeness. I would thus encourage that we follow up and follow through on the important points raised, pushing for positive change in our immediate environment and our societies. We need to continue driving change in the right direction, even with greater force and perseverance when the external catalyst of the pandemic is lifted. The responsibility of changing the entrepreneurial culture, championing business ethics, good governance, responsible investing, and introducing the right elements and skill development in our educational system falls on all of us. Saving the planet, preventing the next pandemic, ensuring a better and safer future for the next generations, building more sustainable business ecosystems, is a common challenge that requires collective action. And leaderships are influenced by societies, and societies by each and every one of us. The excellent webinar we just completed has provided the compass. Now we all need to walk and walk. We all look forward to our next physical or at least roundtable meeting, hopefully at the Grand Britain, since it was mentioned twice today and happens to be my favorite place. And once again, thank you all very much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Apostolopoulos. Let me briefly wrap up and say that it's been a fantastic almost 2 hours. There's a lot of debate on whether ESG is yet to go mainstream, but I think, and I do hope that our robust discussion contributed to that end. The overimpression is that there is a real change taking place, and that change has been accelerated by the impact of the pandemic and the growing awareness of the environmental, social, and governance issues that affects both the planet and our society. That said, there are a lot of things ought to be done, and the path forward will not be an easy one. We look forward to discuss further these ESG issues in a possible iteration of this event. In the meantime, I'd like to thank on behalf of the Board of Directors and myself, all the speakers, Your Excellency, Mr. Yannis Tsakkiris, Mrs. Maria Alexiou, Mrs. Lilian Lektariou, Mr. Mark Hempstead, Mrs. Chloe Laskaridis, Dr. Ioannis Ioann, Professor Ioann. I would also like to thank again our sponsors, without whose support this event would not have been possible. Our sponsors, Inter-American and the Johannes Lattes Public Benefit Foundation, our media sponsors, the newspapers Kafemerini Greek edition and the New York Times International Kafemerini English edition, our strategic partner, the Hellenic Association of Entrepreneurs, our communication consultant, CSR Hellas, our communication supporter, V&O Communication, and our supporters, the Ekali Club, Coca-Cola Hellas, the Athens Medical Group, the Hellenic Bankers Association UK, Involve Entrepreneurship, the AC Laskaridis Charitable Foundation, and 3K Investment Partners. I also want to say a huge thank you to all of you, the audience, for tuning in today and being a very engaged audience. I do regret that we didn't have enough time for the questions. My skills in moderation have to be improved for the future in terms of keeping the time. Do please check our website and social media pages for upcoming events. I'm Isabella Turba. Thank you all very much. Have a nice evening. Goodbye.